She paid just $3 for a rotting treehouse everyone said would collapse by winter. But when she pulled up the floorboards to start repairs, what she found beneath wasn't termites or rot. It was a tunnel. And at the end of that tunnel was $225 million in cash, gold, and jewels that would change her life forever and shake an entire town to its core. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when 12-year-old Emma Richardson stood at the edge of Willow Creek's community bulletin board, her fingers tracing the edge of a faded index card. The paper was yellowed, curling at the corners, and the handwriting wobbled like it had been written by someone whose hands shook with age. Treehouse for sale, $3. As is. Must remove from property within 30 days. Call Margaret. A phone number was scribbled beneath. Emma pulled the card down and held it close to her chest. $3. She had exactly $3.47 saved in the old coffee can under her bed. Money she'd earned pulling weeds for neighbors, returning bottles for deposit, and helping Mrs. Patterson organize her garage last summer. Every penny had been saved for something special. She just hadn't known what until now. Willow Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew your name, your business, and your shoe size. Population 812. One traffic light, 2 churches, a diner that served breakfast all day and closed by 6. Emma had lived here her whole life in a small rental house on Maple Street, with her father, Daniel, a carpenter whose hands were always stained with sawdust and whose smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. Not since Emma's mother had passed when Emma was only 4. The details were fuzzy now, just fragments of a woman who smelled like lavender and sang off-key while cooking. But Emma remembered enough to know that the hole her mother left had never quite filled in. Daniel worked hard. Too hard, some said. He took every job he could find, building decks, fixing porches, installing cabinets. But work in a town this small dried up fast, and the bills never stopped coming. Emma had learned early not to ask for things, not for new clothes when hers still fit, even if they were faded, not for toys when the ones at the thrift store worked just fine, and definitely not for anything that cost more than a few dollars. But $3 she had. Emma walked the 4 blocks home, the index card clutched in her hand like a treasure map. The Richardson house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked. The yard was neat, though. Daniel made sure of that. He said, a man could be poor, but he didn't have to look poor. Emma found him in the garage, sanding down a piece of oak for custom bookshelf. The air smelled like wood shavings and sweat. Dad, she said, holding up the card, I want to buy this. Daniel straightened, wiping his forehead with the back of his wrist. He took the card and read it slowly, his brow furrowing. A treehouse? Emma, honey, we don't have property for a treehouse. It says I have to remove it, Emma explained quickly. I can take it apart and rebuild it here. In the backyard. I've been watching you work my whole life. I know how to use a hammer. I know how to measure twice and cut once. Daniel smiled, but it was tired. Baby, even if you could move it, $3 is $3 you worked hard for. You sure you want to spend it on something that might just be a pile of rotten wood? Emma nodded firmly. I'm sure. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh that came from a father who couldn't say no to his daughter's dreams, even when common sense told him he should. All right, let's go see it. They drove to the address listed on the card in Daniel's beat-up Ford pickup, the engine rattling like loose coins in a jar. The property sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling piece of land choked with overgrown grass and wild blackberry bushes. The main house was a 2-story Victorian, grand once, but now sagging under the weight of decades. And there, in the back corner of the property beneath a massive oak tree, was the treehouse. or what was left of it. Emma's heart sank. It looked worse than she'd imagined. The wood was grey and weathered, split in places, sagging in others. The roof had a hole big enough to see through, and the ladder leading up was missing half its rungs. It looked like a strong wind might finish it off. But Emma saw something else too. She saw the way the beams were joined. Solid mortise and tenon work, the kind that didn't come from a kit. She saw the carved initials on the railing, J, H, plus M, L, inside a heart. She saw a place where someone had once dreamed, built, something with their own hands, loved it enough to carve their story into the wood. "It's perfect," Emma whispered. The front door of the house creaked open, and an elderly woman stepped onto the porch. She was small, frail, with white hair pulled into a loose bun and a cardigan despite the warmth. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane. "You hear about the treehouse?" she called out. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, helping Emma out of the truck. "I'm Daniel. This is my daughter Emma. She's interested in buying it." The woman, Margaret, studied Emma with pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. 12 years old? 12 and a half, Emma said. Margaret smiled faintly. "My late husband built that treehouse in 1963 for our son. He's gone now too. Both of them." She paused, her grip tightening on the cane. "I'm moving to a care facility next month. Can't keep up this place anymore. I put that card up hoping someone would take it before the demolition crew comes. Seemed a shame to just tear it down without giving it a chance." Emma stepped forward, pulling 3 crumpled dollar bills from her pocket. "I have $3. I promise I'll take good care of it." Margaret looked at the money, then at Emma, then at Daniel. She didn't reach for the bills. Instead, she asked, "Why do you want it, child?" Emma thought about that. She could have said, "Because it's all I can afford," or "Because I want to build something that's mine." But what came out was simpler and truer. Because something that someone loved shouldn't just disappear. It should get another chance. Margaret's eyes glistened. She took the $3 with a trembling hand. Then, "It's yours. You've got 30 days. The town thought Emma had lost her mind. At school, kids snickered when she told them what she'd bought. $3 for firewood. One boy laughed. You got ripped off. Even some of the adults shook their heads when they heard. That girl's daddy should have stopped her, they muttered at the diner, teaching her to throw money away. But Emma didn't care. Every day after school, she rode her bike the 2 miles to Margaret's property. Daniel had work, so Emma went alone, armed with a backpack full of tools borrowed from her father's garage. A hammer, a crowbar, work gloves, 2 sizes too big, and a notebook where she sketched measurements and plans. The first week, she just studied the structure. She climbed carefully up the shaky ladder, testing each board, running her hands over joints, memorizing how everything fit together. The treehouse was bigger than it looked from the ground, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a pitched roof and 2 windows. One wall had a small bench built in. In the corner, a wooden box held old comic books, so faded she could barely read them. She started taking it apart, piece by piece, labeling everything with chalk. Beam A, wall panel 2, roof section 3. She worked slowly, carefully, the way her father had taught her. Measure twice, cut once, respect the wood, understand what you're building before you try to change it. By the end of the second week, she'd removed the roof and half the walls. The wood was heavier than she expected, and her hands blistered even through the gloves. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept going. On a Thursday afternoon, the sun high and hot, Emma was prying up the floorboards to salvage any that weren't rotted. Most were solid, surprisingly so. She'd just removed the 3rd board when her crowbar slipped and punched through the one beneath it. The wood gave way with a soft crunch, and Emma froze. That wasn't rot. That was hollow. She set down the crowbar and pulled up the broken board with her hands. Beneath it, Instead of the dirt and tree roots she expected, there was darkness, a gap. She pulled up another board, then another. Within minutes, she'd cleared a section 3 feet wide, and what she saw made her breath catch. A tunnel. Not a natural hollow or a gap in the roots, but a tunnel, man-made. The opening was maybe 3 feet across, lined with old bricks that had been carefully mortared. Stone steps descended into darkness, disappearing from view. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She sat back on her heels, staring down into the black. Her first thought was practical. Was this a well? A root cellar? But no. The bricks were too intentional, the opening too carefully hidden beneath floorboards that had clearly been designed to conceal it. Her second thought was fear. What if something's down there? What if it's dangerous? Her third thought, the one that won, was louder than the others. You have to know. Emma climbed down from the treehouse and ran to her bike. She pedaled home faster than she ever had, her legs burning. She burst into the garage where Daniel was finishing the bookshelf. "Dad!" she gasped, out of breath. "You have to come see this. Now!" Daniel looked up, alarmed by the urgency in her voice. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, but there's something under the treehouse. A tunnel." Daniel's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "A tunnel?" Emma grabbed his arm. "Please, just come." They drove back in silence, Daniel's knuckles white on the steering wheel. When they arrived, Emma led him up the broken ladder and pointed down at the opening. Daniel crouched beside it, shining his phone flashlight into the dark. The beam reached maybe 10 feet before the tunnel bent and disappeared. "Jesus," he muttered. He looked at Emma. "You didn't go down there, did you?" "Not yet," she admitted. "Good." He stood, his jaw tight. "We need to call someone. The fire department, maybe. Or the police. This could be dangerous. Could be a septic system. Could be unstable." But Emma was already shaking her head. "What if we call them and they just seal it up? What if there's something important down there?" Daniel started to argue, then stopped. He looked at his daughter, at the determination in her eyes, and sighed. "You're just like your mother." She looked at him hopefully. "Stubborn as hell," he added, but a smile tugged at his lips. "All right, we'll check it out. Together. But we're doing this smart. Flashlights, rope, and I go first." They came back the next morning, a Saturday, armed with equipment. 2 heavy-duty flashlights, a coil of climbing rope, work gloves, and a first aid kit. Daniel also brought his tool belt and a respirator mask in case the air was bad. The morning was cool and damp, the kind of gray that made everything feel quieter. Daniel tied one end of the rope to the oak tree's trunk and clipped the other to his belt. "I'm going down," he said. "You stay up here. If I say run, you run. You get help. Understand?" Emma nodded, though every part of her wanted to argue. Daniel descended first, his boots scraping against the old brick. Emma watched his flashlight bob and weave as he moved deeper. Seconds stretched into a minute, then 2. "Dad," she called down. "I'm okay." His voice echoed back, muffled and strange. "It goes down about 15 feet, then levels out. There's a passage. Looks like it heads east, toward the main house. Can I come down?" A pause. "Yeah, slowly. Watch your footing." Emma climbed down carefully, her hands gripping the rope, her flashlight clenched between her teeth. When her feet hit the bottom, the air smelled different, cool and damp, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. The walls were brick, the floor smooth stone. The passage was narrow, maybe 4 feet tall, forcing them to crouch. They moved forward together, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was longer than Emma expected, stretching at least 30 feet. The walls were dry, well constructed. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. And then the passage opened up. They stepped into a small chamber, maybe 8 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling that rose high enough for Daniel to stand upright. And there, set into the far wall, was a door. Not a wooden door, but a heavy steel one, the kind you'd see on a bank vault. It had a circular handle and a keypad lock covered in dust. Emma's mouth went dry. "What is this place?" Daniel approached the door slowly, running his hand over the metal. "This isn't old. This is modern. Maybe 20, 30 years old." He tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, shaking his head. "Emma, we need to stop. This is beyond us." But Emma was already moving forward, her flashlight beam tracing the edges of the door. "Wait." She crouched down. There, at the base of the door, almost hidden in shadow, was a small metal panel. She pried it open with her fingers. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "To whoever finds this, if you've made it this far, you're braver than most. The code is Margaret's birthday, 08171939. What lies beyond this door was meant to stay hidden. But perhaps it's time. Use it wisely." It was signed. Simply, J.H. Emma's breath caught. J.H. The initials carved into the treehouse railing. She looked at her father, Margaret's husband. Daniel stared at the note. His birthday was on the listing? No, but we can ask her. They climbed back up the tunnel in silence, both of them too stunned to speak. Emma's mind raced. What could be behind that door? Why would someone build a vault beneath a treehouse? And why leave a note directing someone to open it? When they reached Margaret's front door, she answered slowly, her face creasing with concern when she saw their expressions. "What's wrong?" "Margaret," Daniel said gently. "When was your birthday?" She blinked, confused. "August 17th, 1939. "Why?" Emma held up the note. "Because your husband left this for whoever found the tunnel under the treehouse." Margaret's face went white. She gripped the doorframe. "The tunnel," she whispered. "Oh God. He told me he'd sealed it. He promised me it was gone." "You knew about it?" Daniel asked. Margaret nodded slowly, tears forming in her pale eyes. "He built it in 1976. Said he needed a safe place. Somewhere no one would find. I begged him to tell me what he was hiding, but he wouldn't. He said it was better if I didn't know." She looked at Emma, her voice breaking. "What did you find down there?" "A door," Emma said quietly. "A locked door, and a note with your birthday." Margaret closed her eyes. Then she turned and shuffled inside, motioning for them to follow. In the living room, she opened a small wooden box on the mantel and pulled out an old photograph. She handed it to Emma. It showed a younger Margaret, maybe in her 30s, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and grease-stained hands. Behind them was the treehouse, newly built, gleaming in the sunlight. And beside them, a boy, maybe 7 or 8, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. "My husband, James," Margaret said softly, "and our son, Michael." She paused, her hands shaking. James was a builder, a contractor. He worked on buildings all over the state, banks, museums, government offices. People trusted him because he was good, honest. But in the 70s, something happened. I never knew what. He came home one night, pale as death, and started building that tunnel. Worked on it for months. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was protecting something. Something that could ruin lives if it got out. "What was it?" Emma asked. "I don't know," Margaret whispered. "He never told me, and then he died. Suddenly. Heart attack. 1981. She wiped her eyes. "I thought whatever he hid down there died with him. I never went looking. I was too scared." Daniel and Emma exchanged looks. "Margaret," Daniel said gently, "we need your permission to open that door." Margaret looked at them both for a long time. Then she nodded. "If James left that note, it means he wanted someone to find it eventually." She met Emma's eyes. "Maybe it was supposed to be you." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with possibilities. What could be behind that door? Money? Documents? Something dangerous? Part of her wanted to run down there immediately and punch in the code. Another part, the part that sounded like her father, told her to be careful, to think, but mostly, she felt something else. A pull, a certainty that whatever was behind that door was meant to be found, and that somehow, impossibly, she was meant to be the one to find it. The next morning, Sunday, they returned to the property at dawn. The air was cool and smelled like wet earth. Emma carried the flashlights, while Daniel carried a duffel bag with tools, just in case. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. Something about this felt private, sacred, like they were stepping into someone else's secret and needed to honor it quietly. They descended into the tunnel again, their lights cutting through the darkness. The door waited for them at the end, silent and imposing. Daniel approached the keypad and wiped away the dust with his sleeve. The numbers glowed faintly when he touched them. 08171939, Emma recited from memory. Daniel punched in the code slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a mechanical click echoed through the chamber, loud as a gunshot. The circular handle turned, and the door swung inward with a low groan. Beyond it was darkness. Daniel shined his flashlight inside, and Emma gasped. The room was massive, far bigger than the chamber they stood in, and it was full, not with furniture or boxes, but with something Emma had only ever seen in movies. Money, stacks and stacks of it. Bundled bills lining metal shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. But that wasn't all. There were wooden crates, labeled with numbers and dates. There were canvas bags, stacked in corners, and in the center of the room, on a heavy wooden table, sat something that made Emma's heart stop. Gold bars. Dozens of them gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. Holy God, Daniel breathed. Emma stepped inside, her legs shaking. She approached one of the shelves and pulled down a bundle of bills. They were hundreds, wrapped in paper bands, stamped with a bank logo and a date, June 1977. She set it down carefully and moved to one of the crates. Inside were more bundles of cash, along with jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets, all tangled together like someone had dumped them in a hurry. "Dad," she whispered, "how much is this?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Millions, tens of millions, maybe more." His voice cracked. "Emma, we need to leave. Right now. We need to call the police." But Emma was already moving toward the table. Beside the gold bars was a leather journal, old and cracked. She opened it carefully. The first page was dated March 3rd, 1976. The handwriting was the same as the note they'd found. James's handwriting. She read aloud. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if you've opened this vault, then you're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. What you see here is not stolen. It's hidden. There's a difference." She flipped the page. "In 1975, I was hired to oversee the construction of a new wing at County Savings and Trust. During the work, we discovered discrepancies, money being moved off the books, accounts being drained. I reported it to the board, but they silenced me, threatened my family, said if I spoke, my son would pay the price." She turned another page, her hands trembling. "So, I stayed quiet, but I didn't stay still. Over the next year, I documented everything, recorded conversations, copied ledgers, and I took what they'd stolen from ordinary people, from widows, from veterans, from families who trusted that bank with their futures. I took it before they could hide it in offshore accounts. I took it to protect it until the day I could make it right." Emma looked up at her father, tears in her eyes. He was trying to save it. Daniel's face was pale, or he was justifying theft. "No," Emma said firmly. She flipped through more pages, scanning entries. "He lists everyone here. Names, account numbers, amounts. He was keeping records so it could be returned." She stopped on a page near the end. "But I ran out of time. My health is failing. I've hidden this where only someone brave enough to look will find it. If you're reading this, I'm trusting you to finish what I started. Return it. Make it right. The banks are gone now. The men who threatened me are dead. But the families they stole from, their children, their grandchildren, they're still out there. Give it back. The room fell silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Emma closed the journal carefully and looked around the vault. This wasn't a treasure. It was a burden, a responsibility, and somehow, impossibly, it had landed in the hands of a 12-year-old girl who'd paid $3 for a treehouse. Emma, Daniel said quietly, "This is bigger than us." "I know," Emma whispered, "but he trusted whoever found this to do the right thing." She looked at her father. "We have to finish what he started." Daniel stared at his daughter, at the determination in her young face, and felt something shift in his chest. Pride, fear, and a fierce protectiveness. "You're 12 years old." "I know," Emma said again, "but I'm also the one who found it." She held up the journal, "And I'm not walking away." Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives had just changed forever. And the quiet town of Willow Creek was about to learn that sometimes the biggest secrets are buried in the smallest places, waiting for someone brave enough, someone pure enough, to bring them into the light. For 3 days, Emma and Daniel kept the vault a secret. They told no one, not Margaret, not the police, not even Emma's best friend Sarah, who she told everything to. They needed time to think, to understand what they'd stumbled into before the world came crashing in. Every night after dinner, they sat at the kitchen table with James's journal spread between them, reading entry after entry by the dim light of the overhead bulb. The journal was meticulous. James had documented everything: names, dates, account numbers, amounts stolen. Page after page revealed a conspiracy that had stretched across 5 years, from 1971 to 1976. County Savings and Trust, once the most respected bank in 3 counties, had been systematically draining accounts of its most vulnerable customers. Elderly widows who trusted the bank with their late husbands' pensions, veterans who'd deposited disability payments, immigrant families who'd saved for decades to buy homes. The scheme was elegant in its cruelty. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there. Amounts small enough that people questioned themselves before they questioned the bank. Then, the amounts grew. By 1975, hundreds of thousands were disappearing monthly into offshore accounts controlled by the bank's board of directors. James had been hired as the construction supervisor for a new vault wing. During the installation of the security system, he discovered a second set of books, hidden behind a false panel. Instead of reporting it immediately, he'd photographed everything, copied ledgers, recorded conversations. And when he realized the scope of the theft, when he understood that reporting it would put his family in danger, he made a different choice. He stole it back. Over 8 months, working late nights and early mornings, James systematically moved the stolen money out of the bank's hidden accounts and into the vault he was building beneath his own property. He documented every dollar, every transaction, every victim. He planned to expose everything once his family was safe, once he had enough evidence to bring down not just the bank, but the entire network of corrupt officials who'd enabled it. But his heart gave out before he could finish. February 9, 1981. He died in his sleep, the secret buried with him. Until now, Emma traced her finger over a list of names in the journal. Mrs. Dorothy Blackwell, account 7729. $14,300 stolen between March 1973 and November 1975. She's probably dead now, Emma said quietly. Daniel nodded. Most of them probably are, but their families aren't. He flipped to a page near the back, where James had attempted to trace descendants. Some of the entries had question marks, others had addresses, though they were 40 years old now. "This is a map," Daniel said. A map to make things right. But how? Emma asked. We can't just show up at people's doors with bags of cash. They'll think we're crazy. Or criminals. Daniel closed the journal and rubbed his tired eyes. We need help. Professional help. A lawyer, maybe. Someone who understands estate law and restitution. Emma bit her lip. What if they just take it? What if we tell someone and they use the law to keep it for themselves? Then we find someone we can trust, Daniel said firmly. Someone with a reputation. Someone who has more to lose than to gain. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the glow in the dark stars her mother had stuck to the ceiling years ago. They were fading now, barely visible, but Emma had never taken them down. She thought about James, about how he'd tried to do the right thing and died before he could finish. She thought about all those families who'd lost their savings and never knew why. And she thought about the weight of $225 million sitting in the dark beneath a treehouse, waiting for someone to give it purpose. The next morning, while Daniel was at work framing a house across town, Emma rode her bike back to Margaret's property. She needed to see the vault again, to make sure it was real, that she hadn't dreamed the whole thing. The property was quiet, the house dark. Margaret was visiting her sister for the week, preparing for her move to the care facility. Emma approached the treehouse carefully, scanning the area out of habit. Something felt off, but she couldn't place it. She climbed up, pulled aside the remaining floorboards, and descended into the tunnel with her flashlight. The vault door stood open, just as they'd left it. She stepped inside and stood in the center of the room, surrounded by shelves of money and crates of gold. It was real. All of it. She moved to the wooden table and opened James's journal again, reading more carefully this time. Near the middle, she found something she'd missed before. An entry dated June 14, 1977. Today I spoke with Robert Chen. No, wait, she corrected herself mentally, remembering the instruction to not use that name. Today I spoke with Robert Harris, a lawyer, in the city. I told him everything, showed him the evidence. He said what I'd done was legally complicated. The money was stolen by the bank, but I'd stolen it from the bank. Two wrongs don't make a right in the eyes of the law. He advised me to turn everything over to federal authorities, but I can't. Not yet. The men who run that bank have connections. Police, judges, politicians. If I turn this over now, it'll disappear into evidence and never see daylight again. I have to wait. Wait for them to die. Wait for the system to change. Wait for someone I can trust. Emma's heart sank. Even James hadn't known what to do, and he'd been an adult with resources and connections. What chance did she have? She heard something. A scraping sound from above, near the treehouse. Emma froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight switch. She turned it off and stood in darkness, listening. Footsteps. Someone was up there, walking slowly, carefully, like they were searching for something. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She moved silently toward the vault door, staying low. Through the tunnel, she could see a faint shadow moving across the opening where the floorboards had been removed. A man's voice, low and rough, called out, "Anyone down there?" Emma held her breath. The shadow moved closer. A flashlight beam stabbed down into the tunnel, sweeping back and forth. Emma pressed herself against the wall, praying the beam wouldn't reach the vault door. "I know someone's been digging around here," the voice continued. "Lady up at the house said some kid bought the treehouse." "That you, kid?" Emma's mind raced. She could stay silent, wait for him to leave. Or she could run deeper into the vault and hope there was another way out. But her legs wouldn't move. Fear had rooted her in place. The beam moved closer. Then a second voice, younger, nervous. "Come on, man. There's nothing here. Let's go." "Not yet," the first voice said. "Someone opened something down there. I can smell it. Stale air. Old money," he chuckled. "Smells like opportunity." Emma's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow, they knew about the vault. The flashlight beam hit the vault door. Emma saw the shadow shift, heard the man's sharp intake of breath. Well, 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 what do we have here? Emma didn't think. She moved on pure instinct, slamming the vault door shut from the inside. The steel door was heavy, but adrenaline gave her strength. It closed with a deep, echoing boom. She spun the circular handle, engaging the locks. Then she stood in total darkness, her chest heaving, ears straining. Silence, then pounding. The men were trying to force the door open. "Hey!" the first voice shouted, muffled now. "Open this door." Emma fumbled for her phone, but there was no signal underground. She was trapped, but so was the money. She leaned against the door, trying to think. The men couldn't get in without the code, but she couldn't get out without facing them. The pounding stopped. Voices argued above, too, muffled to make out. Then, footsteps retreating. Emma waited, counting her breaths. 1 minute, 2, 5, 10. Finally, she worked up the courage to crack the door open an inch. The tunnel was empty. She listened for a long moment, then pushed the door fully open and ran. She scrambled up the tunnel, emerged into the treehouse, and climbed down the ladder so fast she nearly fell. She sprinted to her bike and pedaled home faster than she ever had, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. When she burst through the front door, Daniel was just walking in from work, his tool belt still around his waist. "Emma? What's wrong?" She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The men at the property, the voices, the way they'd known something was there. Daniel's face went pale, then red with anger. "You went there alone? After we agreed to stay away until we had a plan? I needed to make sure it was real," Emma said, tears starting to form. "I needed to see it again." Daniel pulled her into a hug, his voice tight. "You could have been hurt. Those men, they could have grabbed you. But they didn't," Emma said into his chest. "I locked the vault. They can't get in." Daniel pulled back, holding her shoulders. "That doesn't matter. They know it's there now. They'll come back with tools, with help." His jaw clenched. "We're out of time. We have to tell someone. Tonight." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with Daniel's laptop, searching for lawyers in the area who specialized in estate law and had reputations for integrity. The list was short. Most lawyers in Willow Creek handled divorces and traffic tickets. They needed someone bigger, someone from the city. Finally, Daniel found a name: Patricia Alvarez, a lawyer based in Capital City, about 90 miles away. Her website showed a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. Her specialty was estate litigation and whistleblower cases. Her bio mentioned she'd worked for the Justice Department before, going into private practice. "She's expensive," Daniel said, scrolling through the fee structure. "We have $225 million in a hole in the ground," Emma said. "I think we can afford her." Daniel looked at his daughter and almost smiled. "When did you get so practical?" "When I bought a treehouse for $3 and found a fortune," Emma replied. Daniel sent an email that night, marked urgent. He didn't explain everything, just enough to intrigue. "Discovered hidden vault, containing stolen money from 1970s bank fraud. Need legal guidance on restitution and ownership. Matter is time-sensitive." He hit send and sat back. They didn't expect a response until morning. But at 9:47 that night, Daniel's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered cautiously. "Hello? This is Patricia Alvarez," a crisp voice said. "I just read your email. Tell me everything." They talked for over an hour. Daniel explained. The treehouse, the tunnel, the vault, James's journal. He told her about the stolen money, the victims, the 40-year cover-up. He mentioned the men who'd shown up at the property. Patricia listened without interrupting, asking questions only when she needed clarification. When Daniel finished, there was a long pause. Then Patricia said, "This is the most complicated case I've heard in 20 years. The money was stolen from a bank that stole it from customers. The man who took it is dead. The bank is defunct. Most of the victims are deceased. And you're telling me a 12-year-old girl found it? Yes, ma'am, Daniel said. Another pause. I need to see this journal. And I need to see the vault. Can you meet me tomorrow? My office, 10 in the morning. We'll be there, Daniel said. Good. And Mr. Richardson? Don't tell anyone else about this. Not friends, not family, not the police, not yet. Depending on how this shakes out legally, you and your daughter could be in danger. People kill for a lot less than $225 million. That night, Emma lay awake again. But this time, her mind wasn't racing with possibilities. It was calculating dangers. The men at the property, the money sitting unguarded, the fact that once word got out, their quiet life in Willow Creek would be over forever. She got up and walked to her father's room. The door was open, and she could see him lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep either. Dad? Yeah? Baby? Are we doing the right thing? Daniel turned his head to look at her. I don't know. But it's the only thing I know how to do. Your mother used to say that doing the right thing isn't about knowing you'll win. It's about knowing you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't try. Emma stepped into the room and climbed onto the bed beside him, the way she used to when she was little and had nightmares. Daniel wrapped an arm around her. They lay there in silence, both staring at the ceiling, both knowing that tomorrow everything would change. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The drive to Capital City the next morning was tense and quiet. Emma sat in the passenger seat, clutching James's journal wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Daniel kept checking the rearview mirror, paranoid they were being followed. The highway stretched long and empty, flanked by farmland turning green with early summer growth. Patricia Alvarez's office was on the 4th floor of a restored brick building downtown. The waiting room was simple but elegant. Leather chairs, dark wood furniture, framed degrees on the walls. A receptionist smiled professionally and told them Miss Alvarez was expecting them. Patricia herself was exactly like her photo. Sharp-eyed, gray-haired, dressed in a navy suit that meant business. She shook Daniel's hand firmly, then crouched down to Emma's level. You must be the girl who bought the treehouse. Yes, ma'am, Emma said. Smart investment, Patricia said with a small smile. $3 for $225 million. That's better returns than Wall Street. She stood and gestured toward her office. Come on, let's see what you've got. They sat across from her massive mahogany desk, while Patricia read through James's journal, her expression unreadable. She took notes on a legal pad, flipping through pages, cross-referencing entries. After nearly 30 minutes, she closed the journal and looked at them both. This is real, she said flatly. Everything in here matches historical records. County Savings and Trust collapsed in 1978 after federal regulators discovered accounting irregularities. Several board members went to prison, but most of the stolen money was never recovered. It was assumed to be in offshore accounts or lost. She tapped the journal, but it wasn't. It was in a vault under a treehouse. So what do we do? Daniel asked. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Legally, this is a nightmare. The money was stolen from the bank, but the bank had stolen it first. James Harris, her eyes flicked to the journal, technically committed a crime by taking it, even if his intentions were noble. However, he's dead. The statute of limitations has long passed. The bank is defunct. Most of the board members are dead. What about the victims? Emma asked. The people it was stolen from? That's where it gets interesting, Patricia said. She pulled out a folder she'd already prepared and slid it across the desk. I did some preliminary research this morning after your call. I cross-referenced some of the names in the journal with public records. Of the 83 victims James documented, 61 are deceased, but they have living descendants. Children, grandchildren, some great-grandchildren. Can we give it back to them? Emma asked. Patricia nodded. Slowly. We can, but it's complicated. First, we need to establish legal ownership of the property where the vault is located. You bought the treehouse, but did you buy the land beneath it? Emma's stomach dropped. No, just the treehouse. The land still belongs to Margaret. Then we need her consent to access the vault, Patricia said. Second, we need to inventory everything in that vault and establish provenance, where it came from, who it belonged to, and who the rightful heirs are. That'll take months, maybe years. And third? Daniel asked. Patricia's expression darkened. Third, we need to move fast. You said 2 men showed up at the property. If they've figured out what's there, others will too. Word spreads. Greed spreads faster. She leaned forward. I'm going to be blunt with you. The moment we file paperwork to begin this process, you're going to become targets. People will try to claim the money is theirs. Lawyers will come out of the woodwork. And some people won't use legal means. They'll use threats, intimidation, violence. Daniel's jaw tightened. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need protection. Police protection. Legal protection. And you need to move that money somewhere secure. Tonight. The drive back to Willow Creek felt twice as long. Emma stared out the window, watching the farmland blur past, her mind heavy. She'd thought finding the vault would be the hard part. Now she realized it was just the beginning. When they got home, Daniel made 3 phone calls. The first was to Margaret, explaining everything. She was silent for a long time, then said quietly, James always said, someone would find it when the time was right. I'll sign whatever you need. The second call was to Sheriff Tom Brennan, Willow Creek's only law enforcement officer. Tom had known Daniel for years, had even helped him get work when times were tight. Daniel trusted him. Tom listened to the story, asked a few questions, then said, I'll be at the property in an hour. Don't go there. Alone. The third call was back to Patricia. She's already contacted a secure transportation company and arranged for an emergency injunction to seal the property until a full legal inventory could be completed. By sunset, the old Victorian property looked like a crime scene. Sheriff Brennan's cruiser sat in the driveway, lights off but presence strong. 2 armed security guards from the transportation company stood near the treehouse. Patricia had driven down from the city and was documenting everything with a legal videographer. Emma stood beside her father, watching as professionals in suits descended into the tunnel she'd discovered just days ago. It felt surreal, like watching a movie of her own life. This is really happening, she whispered. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. Yeah, it is. One of the security team emerged from the tunnel, his face pale. Mom, he called to Patricia. You need to see this. They all descended. Patricia, Sheriff Brennan, Daniel, and Emma. When they reached the vault, even Patricia, who'd seen everything in her 25-year career, went silent. The shelves stretched higher than Emma remembered, stacked with bundled bills in denominations of hundreds, 50s, and 20s. The wooden crates overflowed with gold bars, stamped with dates from the 1960s and 70s. And in the back corner, something Emma hadn't noticed before. A wall safe, small, and built into the brick. Patricia approached it carefully. Was this in the journal? Emma shook her head. I don't think so. Patricia examined the safe. It had a combination lock, old-fashioned, the kind with a dial. She turned to Emma. Any numbers in the journal that might work? Emma thought for a moment, then remembered. Margaret's birthday. The code for the vault door. Patricia tried it. 8, 17, 39. The safe clicked open. Inside were 3 items. A stack of photographs, a key on a simple metal ring, and a sealed envelope marked, "To whom it may concern." Patricia carefully removed the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter, typed on an old typewriter, dated January 3, 1981, just weeks before James died. She read it aloud. "If you're reading this, then you've found what I've hidden. Everything in this vault represents stolen futures, stolen dreams, stolen lives. I took it not for myself, but to preserve it until justice could be served. I've documented every victim, every dollar, every crime. My only wish is that whoever finds this has the courage to finish what I started, return it to those it was taken from. Not to banks, not to governments, not to lawyers, to the people, the families, the children who grew up poor because someone stole their inheritance. Do this, and you'll honor not just their memory, but the belief that good people still exist in this world." The vault fell silent. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Sheriff Brennan removed his hat. Even the security guards looked moved. Patricia folded the letter carefully and looked at Emma. "You found this because you paid $3 for a treehouse no one else wanted. You could walk away right now. Let the state handle it. Let bureaucracy swallow it up. Or you can do what James asked. Finish what he started." Emma didn't hesitate. "We finish it." Over the next week, the property transformed into a command center. Patricia brought in forensic accountants to inventory every dollar. A team of genealogists began tracing the descendants of James's documented victims. Sheriff Brennan coordinated with state police to provide round-the-clock security, and Emma, despite being only 12 years old, became the unofficial heart of the operation. She sat with the accountants, helping them cross-reference entries in James's journal. She met with the genealogists, providing context from the documents she'd read. She even did a recorded interview explaining how she'd found the vault, her words careful and honest. But not everything was progress. Word had leaked. Within days, local news picked up the story. Local girl discovers hidden fortune. Then state news. Then national. Reporters camped outside Daniel's rental house. Emma couldn't go to school without being mobbed. And the calls started. Lawyers claiming to represent supposed victims. Relatives crawling out of the woodwork, claiming connection to James Harris. Even a man who insisted the vault was on his great-grandfather's property and therefore belonged to him. The worst came on a Thursday night. Emma was asleep when she heard glass shatter downstairs. She sat up, heart pounding. Her father burst into her room. "Stay here. Lock the door." But Emma could already hear voices downstairs, harsh and demanding. She crept to her window and saw two men forcing their way through the broken front door. One had a crowbar. Sheriff Brennan's cruiser wasn't there. He'd gone home hours ago. Daniel appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. "I called 911. They're coming." The men downstairs were tearing the house apart, shouting, "Where is it? Where's the journal?" Emma's blood went cold. "We have to hide it." Daniel grabbed her hand. "It's not here. Patricia has it. Come on." They climbed out Emma's window onto the porch roof, then slid down the support column into the backyard. They ran through the neighbors' yards, the sound of destruction echoing behind them. Daniel's truck was parked 2 streets over, a precaution Patricia had suggested. They reached it and drove straight to the police station, where Sheriff Brennan met them with fury in his eyes. "This ends now," he said. "I'm putting you in protective custody until this case is resolved." Emma sat in the sheriff's office, wrapped in a blanket, shaking not from cold, but from the realization of how dangerous this had become. Her father sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Patricia arrived within the hour, her expression grim. "The men were arrested," she reported. "They'll be charged with breaking and entering, assault, and attempted robbery. But they won't be the last." She looked at Emma. "We need to accelerate this process. Get the money distributed before someone else gets hurt." "How long?" Daniel asked. "Weeks if we're lucky," Patricia said. "Months if we're not." Emma looked up at her. "What if we don't wait? What if we just start giving it back now?" Patricia shook her head. "We can't just hand out cash. We need legal documentation, proof of lineage, signed agreements. Otherwise, We're just creating more chaos. But Emma's mind was already working. Then we tell people. We hold a public meeting. We show them James's journal. We let them see that this isn't about lawyers or courts. It's about making things right. Patricia and Daniel exchanged looks. That's? Patricia began, then paused. Actually, that might work. 3 days later, Willow Creek High School's gymnasium was packed. Every seat filled, people standing against the walls, news cameras in the back. Emma sat on the stage beside Patricia, her father, and Sheriff Brennan. In front of her was a microphone and a podium far too tall for her 12-year-old frame. Patricia had objected to letting Emma speak. Too much pressure, she'd said. Too much risk. But Emma had insisted. This story started with me. It should continue with me. Now, standing before hundreds of people and thousands more watching via live stream, Emma felt her hands shake. She gripped the edges of the podium and took a breath. Then she began to speak. My name is Emma Richardson. I'm 12 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I bought a treehouse for $3. The gymnasium fell silent as Emma's voice echoed through the speakers. She cleared her throat and continued. I didn't know what I was buying. I just knew that something someone had built with love shouldn't be forgotten. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. When I found the tunnel beneath that treehouse, I could have walked away. When I found the vault, I could have kept it secret. But there was a journal down there, and in that journal was a man's dying wish. A wish to return what was stolen to the families it was taken from. She pulled out a photocopy of one of James's journal pages and held it up. This is just one page. There are 237 pages like this. Names, amounts, dates, every single person the bank stole from between 1971 and 1976. She set the page down. My dad and I, we didn't find treasure. We found a responsibility. And we're here tonight to tell you that we're going to honor it. The room erupted. Some people applauded. Others shouted questions. A man in the back yelled, How do we know you're not just keeping it for yourself? Emma stood firm, waiting for the noise to die down. Patricia had prepared her for this. Because, Emma said clearly, we're inviting independent auditors to verify every dollar. We're opening the process to public oversight. And we're working with genealogists and historians to track down every single descendant of every single victim. This isn't our money. It never was. A woman stood up in the third row, elderly, her hands shaking as she gripped her cane. My mother's name was Dorothy Blackwell. She died poor in 1983. Always said the bank had stolen her savings, but no one believed her. Everyone said she was just old and confused. The woman's voice cracked. Are you telling me she was right? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Yes, ma'am. Your mother's name is in the journal. $14,300 stolen between March of 1973 and November of 1975. The woman sat down heavily, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. People around her reached out to steady her. The gymnasium felt charged, electric, like lightning was about to strike. Emma gripped the podium tighter and pressed on. This is going to take time. It's going to be complicated. But I promise you, on my mother's memory, we will make this right. The meeting ended 2 hours later, with more questions than answers. But something had shifted. People left the gymnasium not with suspicion, but with cautious hope. Emma stepped down from the stage, exhausted, and found her father waiting with open arms. You did good, baby, he whispered into her hair. You did real good. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, Emma woke to find their front yard filled with news vans. Reporters shouted questions the moment she stepped outside. Emma, what will you do with the money? Emma, are you keeping any for yourself? Emma, how does it feel to be a millionaire? Sheriff Brennan had to escort them to his cruiser just to get to Patricia's office for their daily briefing. Inside Patricia's conference room, the atmosphere was tense. The lawyer had dark circles under her eyes, and her normally crisp suit looked rumpled. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. She slid a stack of papers across the table. Legal filings. 17 of them came in overnight. People claiming to be relatives of James Harris, descendants of bank board members, even someone claiming to be a long-lost heir to County Savings and Trust itself. Daniel rubbed his face. "Can they do that?" "They can file anything they want," Patricia said. "Whether they can win is another matter. But it ties us up. Every filing requires a response. Every claim has to be investigated." She looked at Emma. "And some of these people have serious lawyers. Expensive ones. The kind who don't file unless they think they can win." Emma's stomach twisted. "What do they want?" "Money," Patricia said bluntly. "They're claiming that since James Harris took the money illegally, even if he intended to return it, it became part of his estate when he died. And as his relatives, they're entitled to inherit it." "But that's not what he wanted," Emma protested. "The journal makes that clear." "I know," Patricia said, "but without a legal will explicitly stating his intentions, it's going to be a fight." She pulled out another document. "And there's more. The state is getting involved. The Attorney General's office filed a motion to seize the assets pending a full investigation. They're arguing that the money should go into the state's unclaimed property division." Daniel's jaw clenched. "So, after everything, the government just takes it?" "Not if we can prove clear intent and establish rightful ownership to the original victim's descendants," Patricia said. "But it's going to require a court battle. Multiple court battles. Then we fight," Emma said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She met their eyes steadily. "We fight. That's what James would have wanted. That's what's right." Over the next week, things got worse. Much worse. Someone spray-painted "TIEF" across the front of their rental house, in red letters 3 feet tall. Their mailbox was smashed. Daniel's truck had its tires slashed. Emma couldn't go to school without being harassed. Some kids called her a hero. Others called her a liar and a fake. One boy shoved her in the hallway and said his dad said she was stealing from hard-working people. The town itself split down the middle. Half the residents believed Emma's story and supported her efforts. They brought casseroles to the house, offered to help with security, started a Facebook group called Justice for Emma and the Forgotten Families. The other half viewed her with suspicion and anger. They spread rumors that Emma and Daniel had made up the whole story, that they'd actually found the money years ago and were only coming forward now because they'd been caught. They claimed Emma was being manipulated by her father and the lawyer to keep the fortune for themselves. The local diner refused to serve them. The hardware store owner told Daniel his business wasn't welcome anymore. Emma's best friend Sarah stopped answering her texts after Sarah's parents forbade her from associating with that Richardson girl. The isolation was crushing. Emma had never felt so alone, even with her father by her side. One night, Emma broke. She sat at the kitchen table, homework untouched in front of her, and started crying. Daniel found her there, shoulders shaking, tears dripping onto her math worksheet. He knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms. "I just wanted to do the right thing," Emma sobbed. "Why is everyone so angry?" "Because money makes people crazy," Daniel said softly. "Makes them forget what matters. Makes them scared." "I'm scared too," Emma whispered. "I know, baby. Me too." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim kitchen light, while the world outside judged them without mercy. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Emma and Daniel arrived at the property for another inventory session with Patricia's team. Sheriff Brennan had arranged for security, but the property was remote, and coverage wasn't constant. When they pulled up, something was wrong. The front door of Margaret's old house hung open, and glass sparkled on the porch. "Stay in the truck," Daniel ordered, reaching for his phone. But Emma had already seen it. Smoke. Black smoke curling from the back of the property where the treehouse stood. "No," Emma breathed. She was out of the truck before Daniel could stop her, running toward the smoke. The treehouse was engulfed in flames, the old dry wood burning like kindling. The heat hit her face like a physical force, stopping her 20 feet away. She watched, helpless, as the structure James had built with his own hands, the place where his son had played, the marker above a vault containing $225 million, collapsed into ash and ember. Daniel caught up to her, pulling her back as Sheriff Brennan's cruiser screamed up the driveway. Fire trucks followed minutes later, but it was too late. By the time they extinguished the flames, nothing remained but charred beams and smoking rubble. Arson, the fire chief confirmed an hour later. Accelerant. Gasoline, probably. Someone wanted this place gone. Emma stood staring at the ruins, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Can they get to the vault?" she asked quietly. Sheriff Brennan shook his head. Tunnel entrance was brick and stone. Fire didn't touch it. Vaults still secure. But the message was clear. Someone was willing to destroy evidence, willing to commit crimes, to stop Emma from finishing what James started. And that someone was getting bolder. Patricia arrived within the hour, fury written across her face. This is attempted destruction of evidence, intimidation, possibly conspiracy. She looked at Sheriff Brennan. "We need federal involvement now. This is beyond local jurisdiction." Brennan nodded grimly. "I've already called the state police. FBI's probably next." That night, sitting in a hotel room paid for by Patricia's firm, Emma couldn't sleep. Daniel snored softly in the other bed, exhausted from the day's chaos. Emma lay staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the image of the treehouse burning. Someone out there wanted her to fail, wanted her to give up, walk away, let the money disappear into legal limbo, or their own pockets. She thought about James, dying with his secret, trusting that someday someone would find it and have the courage to finish his mission. She thought about Dorothy Blackwell and the 82 other victims who died thinking they were crazy for believing they'd been robbed. She thought about their children and grandchildren who'd grown up in poverty because someone had stolen their inheritance. And she made a decision. She wasn't walking away. Not for money, not for peace, not for safety. She was seeing this through, whatever it cost. The next morning, she told Patricia her decision. The lawyer studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then we go to war." The first major court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Patricia's team worked around the clock building their case. They compiled evidence, interviewed witnesses, traced genealogies, and prepared exhibits. Emma helped whenever she could, missing school to sit in conference rooms, learning legal terminology she didn't fully understand, but fought to grasp. Then came the breakthrough. One of Patricia's paralegals, a detail-oriented woman named Grace, was cataloging items from the vault for the 100th time when she noticed something odd about the wooden table in the center of the vault. The table where the gold bars had been stacked. There was a seam in the top, barely visible, running along one edge. Grace called Patricia immediately. Within an hour, they were back in the vault with tools. The table's top wasn't solid. It was a false lid. And beneath it, in a hidden compartment lined with oilcloth, were more documents. Legal documents. Patricia's hands trembled as she lifted them out. A will. James Harris's will, properly notarized, and dated February 1st, 1981, just 8 days before he died. She read it aloud in the vault's echoing silence, her voice steady but emotional. "I, James Matthew Harris, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my final wishes. The contents of the vault located beneath my property, consisting of currency, gold, jewelry, and other assets, totaling approximately $225 million, are not my property. They belong to the victims of County Savings and Trust and their descendants. It is my wish, my dying command, that these assets be returned to their rightful owners or heirs, as documented in my journals. Should I die before completing this task, I entrust it to whoever finds this vault, provided they do so with pure intent and honest heart. To that person, I grant full authority to act as executor of this restitution, with the assistance of legal counsel and oversight from appropriate authorities. This is not a treasure to be claimed, it is a debt to be repaid. The vault fell silent. Then Emma, her voice small but certain, said, "That's me. I found it with pure intent." Patricia looked at her, eyes glistening. "Yes, you did. And this changes everything." The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. News cameras lined the back wall. Spectators filled every seat, with more standing in the halls. Judge Margaret Holloway, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and no-nonsense eyes, presided from the bench. On one side sat Patricia and her team, with Emma and Daniel in the front row. On the other side sat a lineup of lawyers representing the various claimants, alleged relatives of James Harris, representatives from the State Attorney General's office, and even a lawyer for the defunct bank's insurance company, arguing they had rights to recovered assets. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. "This court is convened to hear motions regarding the estate and assets discovered on the property formerly owned by James Matthew Harris, now owned by Margaret Louise Harris." She looked over her reading glasses at the assembled attorneys. "I've reviewed the filings. This is complicated, messy, and frankly, unprecedented. So let's start simply. Miss Alvarez, your client claims to be the rightful executor of these assets. On what grounds?" Patricia stood, commanding the room. "Your Honor, we have discovered and will submit into evidence a legal will signed by James Harris 8 days before his death. This will explicitly names whoever finds the vault with pure intent as executor of the restitution process. My client, Emma Richardson, age 12, purchased the property fixture where the vault was concealed, discovered it through lawful exploration, and immediately sought legal guidance on proper handling. She has demonstrated nothing but good faith throughout this process." A lawyer from the other side stood, a man in an expensive suit with slicked back hair. "Objection. Your Honor, a will cannot name an unknown future person as executor. That's legally absurd. Furthermore, a 12-year-old child cannot serve as executor of an estate of this magnitude." Patricia didn't miss a beat. The child's age is irrelevant. She's not acting alone. She's represented by counsel and has requested proper oversight. As for the unusual nature of the will, James Harris was under extraordinary circumstances. He couldn't name a specific person because he didn't know who would find the vault. But his intent is crystal clear. Judge Holloway held up a hand. "I'll review the will in chambers, but let's address the elephant in the room." She looked at the state's attorney. "The Commonwealth is arguing these assets should be seized as unclaimed property. Explain." The state's attorney stood, a thin woman with sharp features. "Your Honor, County Savings and Trust was a regulated financial institution. When it collapsed, federal and state regulators took over its assets and liabilities. Any recovered funds should rightfully go through the state's unclaimed property division for proper distribution." Patricia countered immediately. The state had 50 years to investigate and recover these funds. They failed. James Harris succeeded. And his clear intent was direct restitution to victims' families, not government bureaucracy. "And what about us?" Another lawyer stood, representing a man claiming to be James Harris's nephew. "My client is the deceased's closest living relative. Under normal estate law, he would inherit. Except James Harris explicitly stated in his will that these assets aren't his to inherit." Patricia shot back. "They're stolen property. He recovered and documented for return. There's no inheritance here." The arguments went on for hours. Lawyers shouted over each other. Judge Holloway banged her gavel repeatedly for order. Emma sat silently, watching it all, feeling smaller and smaller as the legal machine ground on around her. Finally, As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall courtroom windows, Judge Holloway called for a recess. Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. I need time to review these documents and consider the arguments. She looked directly at Emma. Young lady, approach the bench. Emma's heart jumped into her throat. She stood and walked forward on shaky legs. Daniel started to follow, but the judge held up a hand. Just the girl. Emma stood before the high bench, craning her neck to look up at Judge Holloway. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Do you understand what's happening here? I think so, Your Honor, Emma said softly. People are arguing about whether I have the right to give the money back to the families it was stolen from. Judge Holloway's expression softened slightly. Do you understand that if I rule in your favor, your life will never be the same? You'll be responsible for distributing $225 million. You'll be scrutinized, criticized, possibly threatened. Some people will call you a hero. Others will call you worse. Are you prepared for that? Emma thought about the treehouse burning, about the spray paint on her house, about losing her best friend and being shoved in school hallways, about the elderly woman in the gymnasium crying because her mother had been right all along. She looked Judge Holloway in the eye. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to do what's right. The judge studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Return to your seat. That night, Emma and Daniel sat in Patricia's office, reviewing the day's events. Patricia was cautiously optimistic. The judge asking to speak to you alone was good. She wanted to see who you are, what you're made of. Did I say the right things? Emma asked, anxiously. You said true things, Patricia replied. That's better than right. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed. Word had spread that Judge Holloway was ready to rule. People lined the hallways, hoping to get inside. News helicopters circled overhead. Emma sat between her father and Patricia, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Judge Holloway entered, and everyone rose. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked out over the courtroom. I've made my decision, she announced. This is one of the most unusual cases I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. We have stolen money that was stolen back. A dead man's will naming an unknown future person, a child at the center of a fortune, and dozens of families who've waited 50 years for justice. She paused, and the courtroom held its breath. After careful consideration of the evidence, the will, and the testimony, I'm ruling as follows. She looked directly at Emma. Emma Richardson will be recognized as the executor of the James Harris Restitution Trust, subject to court oversight, and with the continued assistance of legal counsel. The assets in question will not be seized by the state, will not pass to alleged relatives, and will not be tied up in bureaucratic limbo. They will be returned, as James Harris intended, to the documented victims and their rightful heirs. The courtroom exploded. Some people cheered. Others shouted in protest. Lawyers jumped to their feet with objections. Judge Holloway banged her gavel furiously. Order! Order! In this court. When the room finally quieted, she continued. This process will be transparent, audited, and subject to monthly reports to this court. Miss Richardson will work with genealogists, historians, and financial experts to trace every victim and every heir. This will take time, likely years, but it will be done right. She looked sternly at the assembled lawyers. Any interference, any attempts to intimidate or influence this process will result in contempt charges and possible criminal prosecution. Am I clear? Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the room. Judge Holloway banged her gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. Emma sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Daniel pulled her into a tight hug. Patricia's eyes were bright with tears. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. But Emma didn't feel victorious. She felt the weight of $225 million settle onto her 12-year-old shoulders like an anvil. She felt the responsibility of 83 families' futures pressing down on her chest, and she felt terrified that she might somehow fail them all. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them, microphones shoved in Emma's face. Questions shouted from all directions. Sheriff Brennan and 2 state police officers had to clear a path to Patricia's car. As they drove away, Emma looked back at the crowd, at the anger and hope and greed all mixed together on their faces. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Patricia nodded. "Yes, the real work starts now." That night, Emma couldn't eat dinner. She sat at the small hotel room table, staring at the list of names Patricia had printed out. 83 victims, 162 confirmed living descendants. And those were just the ones they'd found so far. Each name represented a family, a story, a life that had been derailed by theft and now might be restored. She picked up a pen and started writing next to each name, trying to memorize them, to make them real people instead of just entries in a journal. "Dorothy Blackwell," she wrote, "had a daughter. Died thinking she was crazy. Robert Martinez. 3 children. Lost his house in 1977. Couldn't figure out why. Daniel found her like that an hour later. Pages of notes spread across the table, tears running down her face. "Baby, you need rest." "I need to remember them," Emma said. "If I'm going to do this, I have to remember they're real people." Daniel knelt beside her chair and took her hand. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Just like your mother. But you can't carry all this alone." Emma looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "What if I mess up? What if I give money to the wrong person or miss someone who deserves it?" "Then we fix it," Daniel said firmly. "We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try our best and be honest when we make mistakes." That's all James asked for. Someone with pure intent. Emma wiped her eyes and looked back at the list of names. "Then we start tomorrow." And they did. The work of restoring 83 stolen futures had begun, but so had the real battle. The people who'd lost in court weren't giving up. They filed appeals, launched smear campaigns, hired private investigators to dig up dirt on Emma and Daniel. The threats continued. The vandalism escalated. Someone left a dead rat on their doorstep with a note, "Drop dead thief." But for every person who attacked them, 2 more rose to defend them. The community that had been divided started to unite. Local businesses donated security cameras. Neighbors organized watch rotations. The Justice for Emma Facebook group grew to 5,000 members, then 10,000. People from across the country sent letters of support, small donations to help with legal fees, and stories of their own families being cheated by banks or corporations. Emma realized something profound. This wasn't just about returning money anymore. It was about showing that ordinary people, even kids, even the overlooked and underestimated, could stand up to power and greed and win. It was about proving that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when the whole world seems against you, still matters. She thought about James Harris, dying with his secret, hoping someone would find it. She thought about her mother, gone too soon, who'd taught her that kindness was strength. And she thought about the treehouse that started it all, bought for $3 by a girl who just wanted to save something beautiful from being forgotten. Maybe that's what all of this was really about. Not money, not treasure, but saving something beautiful, something true, something worth fighting for. And Emma Richardson, 12 years old with grease under her nails and fire in her heart, was just stubborn enough to see it through. The work began on a Monday morning in late June, 3 months after Judge Holloway's ruling. Emma sat in a conference room that Patricia had set up specifically for the restitution project. The walls were covered with genealogy charts, timelines, and photographs of the victims from James's journal. A team of 6 people worked alongside her: 2 genealogists, a forensic accountant, a historian specializing in banking fraud, and 2 paralegals who handled the endless documentation. Emma had turned 13 2 weeks earlier. Her birthday had been quiet, just her and her father, and a small cake from the grocery store. She'd blown out the candles and made a wish that she'd have the strength to finish what she'd started. Now, looking at the mountain of work ahead, she hoped that wish would be enough. The first family they contacted was Dorothy Blackwell's daughter, Helen, the woman who'd stood up in the gymnasium and cried. Helen was 71 now, living in a small apartment on the other side of town. When Emma and Patricia knocked on her door, Helen opened it with trembling hands. "Come in, she said, ushering them into a living room filled with photographs and memories. She served them sweet tea in glasses that didn't match and sat on the edge of her worn sofa, hands clasped in her lap. "I still can't believe it's real. All these years, I thought Mama was just confused." Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Mrs. Helen, based on James Harris's documentation and our verification with historical bank records, your mother, Dorothy Blackwell, had $14,300 stolen from her account between 1973 and 1975. Adjusted for inflation and lost interest over 50 years, that amount is now valued at approximately $137,000. Helen's hand went to her chest. $137,000? Emma leaned forward. "It's yours." "Well, it was your mother's, but now it's rightfully yours. We just need you to sign some documents and provide identification so we can process the transfer." Helen started crying, silent tears that ran down her weathered cheeks and dripped onto her clasped hands. When she could finally speak, her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama died in a county nursing home because I couldn't afford better care. She died thinking she'd failed us, that she'd somehow lost all her money through carelessness. This won't bring her back, but it proves she wasn't crazy. It proves she was right. That's why we're doing this," Emma said softly. "So, everyone knows the truth." They spent 2 hours with Helen, going through the paperwork, explaining the process, and listening to her stories about Dorothy. When they left, Helen stood in her doorway waving goodbye, still crying but with a smile that could have lit up the whole street. That was the first of 162 visits. Emma and Patricia traveled across 3 states over the next 8 months, meeting descendants, sharing documentation, and returning what had been stolen. Some visits were joyful reunions with lost family history. Others were tense negotiations with people who didn't trust that this was real. A few families refused the money outright, saying it felt like blood money, or that they'd moved on and didn't want to dredge up the past. But most people welcomed them with open arms and tears. They heard stories about grandparents who'd worked themselves to death trying to recover from the theft, about children who dropped out of school because the college fund had mysteriously vanished, about houses lost, businesses failed, dreams abandoned, all because someone had decided their savings were easier to steal than to protect. Emma listened to every story. She took notes. She remembered names and faces. And slowly, she began to understand something profound. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about validation, about families finally understanding that their struggles hadn't been their fault. By the end of the first year, they'd successfully returned over $87 million to 93 families. The remaining money would take longer because some descendants were harder to trace, some living overseas, others having changed names through marriage or adoption. But Emma was patient. She'd made a promise, and she intended to keep it. During this time, something unexpected happened. Emma became a public figure. News outlets followed the story obsessively. The girl who gave away millions became a headline. Talk shows wanted to interview her. A documentary crew asked to follow her work. A publisher offered a book deal. Emma turned down almost everything. She agreed to one interview with a national news magazine, and only because Patricia convinced her it would help protect against future legal challenges. The interviewer, A woman in her 40s, with kind eyes, asked Emma the question everyone wanted to know. You could have kept this money. Legally, you might have been able to argue ownership. Why didn't you? Emma thought about her answer carefully. She was sitting in Patricia's conference room, the walls covered with the faces of people she'd helped. Because it wasn't mine, she said simply. And because I know what it's like to struggle. My dad and we've been poor my whole life. There were nights we ate cereal for dinner because that's all we had. Months where we had to choose between heat and groceries. If someone had stolen from us during those times, if someone had taken the little we had, it would have destroyed us. She looked directly at the camera. How could I do that to someone else? How could I keep money that could change lives when I knew whose lives it should change? The interview went viral. Millions of people watched it. Emma's words were quoted on social media, printed on t-shirts, turned into memes. She became a symbol for a generation that felt betrayed by institutions and inspired by individual integrity. Schools invited her to speak. Churches asked her to share her story. But Emma stayed focused on the work. The second major decision Emma made was creating the James Harris Restitution Foundation. With Patricia's help and approval from the court, they set aside $15 million from the vault to establish a permanent foundation dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud and white-collar crime. The foundation would provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and direct aid to people fighting to recover stolen assets. The foundation's offices were established in a renovated building in downtown Willow Creek, creating 12 jobs in a town that desperately needed them. Emma insisted that the foundation's logo include the Treehouse, a reminder of where everything started. And on the wall of the main conference room, they hung a portrait of James Harris holding his son Michael, both of them smiling beside the newly built treehouse in 1963. Emma spoke at the foundation's opening ceremony, her voice stronger now, more confident. James Harris died, believing he'd failed, but he didn't fail. He succeeded in ways he never lived to see. She gestured to the room full of staff and volunteers. This foundation exists because one man refused to accept injustice. Because he believed that doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous, even when you're alone, still matters. We honor his memory, not with statues or plaques, but with action, by continuing his work, by standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. The applause was thunderous. Daniel stood in the back of the room, tears streaming down his face, so proud of his daughter, he thought his heart might burst. But Emma's most ambitious project was still to come. Margaret's old property, where the treehouse had stood and the vault had been discovered, was officially transferred to Emma through a legal process that took months to finalize. Margaret, now comfortable in her care facility, had insisted that land should belong to the girl who brought my James's dream to life, she'd said. Emma stood on the property one autumn morning, looking at the charred remains of the treehouse. The vault beneath had been emptied, documented, and sealed. The money was gone, distributed to its rightful owners. But the tunnel remained, a testament to one man's extraordinary effort to preserve justice. Emma had a vision. She shared it with her father, with Patricia, with the foundation board, and eventually with the town. She wanted to rebuild the treehouse, not as a child's playhouse, but as a community center, a place where families who'd been helped by the restitution could gather, where the foundation could hold meetings and counseling sessions, where kids from struggling families could come for tutoring, mentorship, and hope. The design was ambitious, a 3-story structure built around and incorporating the original oak tree, which had survived the fire. The ground floor would house the foundation's community outreach program. The second floor would be a library and study center. The third floor, built in the branches themselves, would be a memorial room dedicated to James Harris and the 83 victims. with their names inscribed on wooden plaques and their stories preserved for future generations. Construction began in early spring. Emma worked alongside the builders whenever she wasn't in school or traveling for restitution visits. She learned to frame walls, install windows, and sand floors. Her father, finally busy with steady work as the project's head carpenter, taught her every skill he knew. They worked side by side, building something that would outlast them both. The town that had once been divided rallied around the project. Volunteers showed up every weekend. Local businesses donated materials. The hardware store owner who'd once refused to serve them showed up one Saturday morning with a truckload of lumber and a quiet apology. "I was wrong about you," he told Emma. "I let fear and greed cloud my judgment. I'm sorry." Emma shook his hand. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." By autumn, the structure stood complete. 3 stories of warm wood and wide windows, wrapped around an oak tree that had witnessed 50 years of secrets. The grand opening was scheduled for October 15th, exactly 18 months after Emma had bought the original treehouse for $3. The entire town showed up. So did news crews from 6 states. Descendants of the victims traveled from across the country to attend. Helen Blackwell was there, along with 37 other family members who'd received restitution. They gathered in the golden afternoon light, standing before a building that shouldn't exist, built from a fortune that should have stayed hidden, by a girl who should have been too young to care. Mayor Collins, who'd been elected after the previous mayor, retired in disgrace, spoke first. Willow Creek has always been a town of hard-working people who take care of their own. But we lost our way for a while. We forgot that taking care of our own means all of us, not just the comfortable ones. Emma Richardson reminded us what community really means. She turned and gestured toward Emma. "This building isn't just wood and nails. It's a promise that we'll never again look away when people are suffering, that we'll stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The crowd applauded. Then Patricia spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "When Emma first called my office, I thought it was a prank. A 12-year-old girl claiming to have found $225 million under a treehouse? It sounded impossible. But Emma taught me that impossible just means nobody's been brave enough to try yet." She paused. "This foundation, this building, the 162 families who've received justice, none of it would exist without a girl who paid $3 for a broken treehouse because she believed things worth loving are worth saving." Finally, it was Emma's turn. She stood at the podium. Now, 14 years old, taller than she'd been when this started, but still slight and young. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strange, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration to love. "I've been thinking a lot about beginnings," she started. "How we don't always know when we're starting something important. I didn't know that buying a treehouse would change my life. I just knew it felt right." She smiled. "My mom died when I was little. I don't remember much about her, but my dad tells me she used to say that the world doesn't change because of big dramatic moments. It changes because of small, quiet choices made by ordinary people who decide to care." She looked at the building behind her. This place started with a lot of small choices. James Harris choosing to document the theft instead of ignoring it. Choosing to save the money instead of walking away. My dad choosing to let me buy a treehouse even though it seemed like a waste. Margaret choosing to trust us with her husband's secret. Judge Holloway choosing to believe a kid could handle a responsibility this big. And all of you choosing to support us instead of tearing us down. Emma's voice grew stronger. "I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just a girl who found something that didn't belong to her and decided to give it back. But I learned something through all this." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Every single person has the power to change the world. Not by being rich or famous or powerful, but by choosing integrity over greed, by choosing compassion over indifference, by choosing to do the right thing even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. James Harris died thinking he'd failed. Emma continued. But he didn't. His choice to document everything, to preserve it, to hope that someone would find it and finish his work. That choice echoed across 50 years and changed 162 families' lives. She smiled through tears. Never underestimate the power of one person refusing to give up on what's right. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People stood, clapping and crying, overwhelmed by the simple truth of her words. Daniel watched his daughter from the front row, barely holding it together. She'd grown up so fast. Too fast, maybe. But she'd grown up strong and good and true, and he couldn't have been prouder. After the ceremony, as the sun set and cast long shadows across the property, Emma walked alone to the vault entrance. The tunnel was sealed now, covered with a protective grate and marked with historical plaque explaining what had been found there. She stood looking at it, remembering the fear and excitement of that first descent into darkness, not knowing what she'd find. A voice behind her made her turn. Helen Blackwell stood there, leaning on her cane, her eyes bright. "I wanted to thank you properly. Away from all those people and cameras. You already thanked me, Mrs. Helen." Helen shook her head. "No, I thanked you for the money. That's not what I'm thanking you for now." She gestured around the property. "I'm thanking you for proving that good people still exist. That justice, real justice, is still possible. My granddaughter is 15. She watched your interview, and now she wants to be a lawyer. Says she wants to help people like you do." She reached out and took Emma's hand. "You didn't just give us money. You gave us hope. You gave us proof that this broken world can still be fixed, one honest choice at a time." Emma hugged her. This woman she'd known less than 2 years, but who felt like family. That's all I ever wanted. Over the next year, the foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. The community center hosted after-school programs for 200 kids. The legal aid program helped 43 families fight fraud cases. 3 scholarships were established in James Harris's name, sending local kids to college who never thought they'd have the chance. Emma received letters every week from people she'd helped and people she'd inspired. A man in Oregon wrote to say he'd return money he'd found that didn't belong to him because Emma's story had convinced him it was the right thing to do. A woman in Florida launched her own nonprofit to help elder abuse victims after reading about the foundation. A 10-year-old boy in Texas sent Emma $1 with a note that said, "This is for the next family that needs help." Emma kept every letter in a box under her bed. On hard days, when the foundation work felt overwhelming or when she doubted herself, she'd read them and remember why it all mattered. Her own life had changed too. Daniel's carpentry business thrived, and they moved out of the rental house into a small but comfortable home on Maple Street, with a front porch and a backyard. Emma made it clear they weren't using restitution money for personal expenses. Every dollar was accounted for, tracked, and transparent. But Daniel's work was steady now, and people trusted him again. That was worth more than any fortune. Emma's relationship with school improved as well. The kids who'd bullied her had moved on or apologized. She'd made new friends, kids who admired her, not for the money, but for her character. Sarah, her old best friend, reached out with a tearful apology, and they slowly rebuilt their friendship on more honest ground. But Emma never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, treated as less than. She used that memory to fuel her work, to remind herself why the foundation mattered, why every family deserved dignity and justice, regardless of their bank account or social status. 2 years after the Treehouse's grand opening, Emma stood in front of her high school, giving a speech for Career Day. She was 16 now, taller, more confident, but still grounded in the values that had guided her from the beginning. A freshman raised his hand. "Miss Emma, do you ever regret it? Finding the money? Your life would be so much easier if you'd just walked away." Emma smiled. "Easier? Maybe. Better? Never." She leaned against the desk. "I learned something important through all this. Easy and good aren't the same thing. Walking away would have been easy. Keeping the money would have been easy. Letting lawyers and bureaucrats fight over it, while I went back to my normal life, would have been easy. But none of that would have been good." Another student asked, "What advice would you give someone who finds themselves in an impossible situation?" Emma thought about her answer. "Start with what you know is right. Not what's profitable, not what's convenient, not what everyone else is doing, just what's right. Then take one step toward that, even if it's scary. Then take another. You don't have to see the whole path. You just have to trust that if you keep choosing integrity, the path will appear." When would you tell your younger self if you could go back to the day you bought the treehouse? Emma smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I'd tell her that $3 can change the world if you spend it with purpose. And I'd tell her she's braver than she knows." The students applauded, and Emma felt a warmth in her chest. These kids, they were growing up in a world that often felt hopeless, where institutions failed them and adults let them down. But maybe, just maybe, her story would remind them that individual actions still mattered. That one person, even a young one, even a poor one, even someone the world overlooked, could still make a difference. That evening, Emma drove out to the property, alone. She did this sometimes when she needed to think, or when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy. She parked and walked to the community center, using her key to let herself in. The building was quiet, empty, the only light coming from the moon through the tall windows. She climbed the stairs to the third-floor memorial room. The walls were covered with photographs and plaques. James Harris and his son Michael, the 83 victims, the 162 descendants who'd received restitution. Each face a story, a life, a piece of the larger puzzle. Emma sat in the center of the room and looked around. Sometimes she felt James's presence here, a warmth in the air, a sense that he was watching and approving. She didn't know if she believed in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, but she believed in legacy, in the idea that our choices echo beyond our lifetimes, touching people we'll never meet, changing futures we'll never see. "You did good, James," she whispered, into the quiet. "You did real good." A few months later, on a crisp October morning, Emma received a letter from Patricia. Inside was a final report. The last family had been found and restitution completed. $225 million. Distributed across 3 years to 162 families. Every penny accounted for. Every family contacted. The mission James had started in 1976 was finally, officially, complete. Emma held the report in her hands and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of a promise kept. She'd done it. They'd all done it together. That night, the foundation held a quiet celebration. No press, no cameras, just the people who'd worked on the project from the beginning. Patricia raised a glass of sparkling cider and toasted. To James Harris, who refused to accept injustice. To Emma Richardson, who refused to walk away from responsibility. And to every person in this room who proved that good people doing good work can still change the world. They drank, and Emma felt a chapter closing, but she also felt a new one beginning. The foundation would continue. There were always people who needed help, always families fighting fraud, always victims seeking justice. Her work wasn't done. It was evolving. As Emma drove home that night, she passed the community center, now lit up against the dark sky. Children's artwork hung in the windows. The library glowed warm from within. She could see the outline of the oak tree, ancient and strong, holding up the dreams of a man who'd died 40 years ago, and a girl who'd been brave enough to bring them to life. She thought about the journey from that first day when she'd pulled a faded index card off a bulletin board. Treehouse, for sale, $3. She'd bought it, thinking she was saving a piece of history. She hadn't known she'd be saving so much more. Emma Richardson had learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. That integrity isn't about grand gestures, but about small choices made consistently, even when no one's watching. That one person, armed with nothing but determination and a clear conscience, can stand against greed, corruption, and injustice, and win. She'd learned that treasures aren't always gold and jewels. Sometimes they're journals full of truth. Sometimes they're old men's dying wishes. Sometimes they're the tears of gratitude from people who finally understand their struggles weren't their fault. And she'd learned that the most valuable things in life, the things worth fighting for, can't be bought with any amount of money. Things like justice, dignity, and the simple knowledge that you did right by people who counted on you. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to see beyond themselves and fight for something bigger. As Emma Richardson pulled into her driveway, her father waiting on the porch with a smile and open arms, she realized something profound. She hadn't found a fortune under a treehouse. She'd found her purpose, and that, more than any amount of money, had made her rich beyond measure. The girl who'd been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated had become a force for justice. The child who'd counted pennies in a coffee can had distributed millions. The daughter who'd grown up poor had helped 162 families find financial security. But most importantly, the person who'd bought a treehouse for $3 because she believed things worth loving are worth saving had proven that belief true in ways she never imagined. Because for Emma Richardson and for everyone whose life she'd touched, the lesson was clear. It's not about how much you have. It's about what you do with it. It's not about waiting for someone else to fix what's broken. It's about picking up the tools yourself and building something better. And it's not about being perfect or powerful or privileged. It's about being present, being honest, and being brave enough to do the right thing even when the whole world tries to stop you. The treehouse that everyone said was worthless had become priceless. The girl they'd called foolish had become wise, and the $3 investment had yielded returns that couldn't be measured in currency, but only in lives changed, families restored, and hope renewed. Emma turned off the car and sat for a moment in the darkness, looking at the home she shared with her father. Through the window, she could see him moving around the kitchen, probably making her favorite tea. She thought about her mother, gone but never forgotten, who'd taught her through Daniel's stories that kindness was the greatest strength. She thought about James Harris, who'd trusted that someone would finish what he'd started. And she thought about all the families sleeping peacefully tonight, because someone had finally made things right. She stepped out into the cool evening air, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma felt light. The weight she'd been carrying was still there, but it no longer crushed her. It grounded her, reminded her of who she was and what she stood for. The stars shone bright above Willow Creek, the same stars that had watched James build his vault, that had seen Emma buy a treehouse, that had witnessed every triumph and trial along the way. They'd keep watching, Emma knew. And maybe, years from now, they'd watch another kid make another small choice that would ripple out and change everything. That was the real treasure. Not the money under the treehouse, but the proof that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could still shake the world. That integrity still mattered. That justice, though delayed, could still arrive. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest investments paid the biggest dividends. Emma walked up the porch steps toward the warm light and her father's embrace, carrying with her not wealth, but something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge that she'd lived up to James's faith, honored his memory, and finished what he'd started. The treehouse was gone, but its legacy lived on. The vault was sealed, but its secrets had been freed, and the girl who'd paid $3 for a collapsed dream had built an empire of hope that would stand for generations. Because in the end, it was never about the money. It was about having the courage to care when caring was costly, about having the strength to stand when standing was dangerous, and about believing, even when the whole world said otherwise, that doing the right thing still mattered. Emma Richardson had bought a treehouse, but what she'd really purchased was the chance to prove that heroes don't need capes or superpowers. They just need a clear conscience, a brave heart, and the refusal to walk away when someone needs help. And for $3, that was the bargain of a lifetime. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you about courage, hope, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Click to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing always matters, no matter the cost.